This is Family Electric Ghost, and I'm DeYoung for the first well of the program. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. So good to be here.
You are a coach, a choice coach, author, and entrepreneur. And our focus tonight is going to be this topic: how can a choice change your life? And this episode um, 906 of the Family Electric Ghost podcast. So we've been around since 2016. We're at almost 1,000 episodes. We're happy about that. So um, that's what we're going to focus on is that this choice can change your life. But before we do that, we do have to mention that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you use code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription. This podcast is featured on Newsly, and you'll be able to listen to it there after the show is over. So thank you again for being on the show tonight.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And we also will bring up the choicequestions.com. You can maybe tell people what happens if they go there.
You want me to tell them that now?
Yeah. Just at the beginning. Just we'd like to do at the beginning and maybe at the end too.
So at choicequestions.com, I created basically a really great guide that are 5 key questions to ask yourself before you make a choice so that you can be a bit more thought out. So it's just a really great, get it, opt in for free, and you'll get that access to that guide.
Okay, well, thank you again for being on the program. We have their main, but sure, we could probably get to that other one from there too, right? Maybe.
From KimDeYoung.com is
website?
Yes, that's my primary website. You can learn all about me. You can access a link to my book. You can learn all about mapping. There's a lot it's a fun site to browse. There's a lot of blogs, a lot of access to my podcast. So go browse around and have a good time.
So we always like to start at the beginning. So how did you get into the I guess you call yourself a choice coach, and that's a different term. That's the first time I've ever heard of it, and so I'm kind
That's
of
good. That's
curious.
good. I'm hopefully the only one.
Yeah, I have not. I've been interviewing people since 2016, and I have not heard that.
Yeah.
So you're the first person I've ever seen use
Good.
that. So maybe you can talk to us about what that means.
Yeah. So it is about a decade now, not exactly 9.5 years ago, when I'd been a coach for quite a while, but I was being interviewed for something, and the words that came out of me, I can't recall the question, but I recall my answer, which was something to the degree of what happens when we make a choice and take action? How does our life unfold? And as that interview ended, and I just began thinking, what does happen? I decided to go back to my life. I went back to a particular choice I'd made a year prior. And I began to take a mind mapping software and sort of look at how did my choice unfold. This was a particular choice to attend an event, but from the event, I met people, other opportunities, and things happened. Anyway, I create this really kind of cool mind map showing all that's transitioned in a particular window of time, and shared it with a friend. And she said, Kim, this map is extraordinary. What if you just focus on creating these maps and exploring other people's choices just like you did your own? And it was a gorgeous question, which then led me to a full year. This was 2014, in which I explored the choices of 29 people. We looked back for 27 of them. We looked back at choices they'd made. These were choices that some of them were something they'd made a year or two ago. Others were choices they'd made a decade prior. But in all of them, we were really digging into why did they make the choice? What had happened for them? What had gone on? How had that choice made a difference for them? For a couple of the people, I then looked forward. What choice could they make and what was going to happen? Anyway, after this pretty extraordinary year of delving into choices with people, I was taking in so much amazing information and learning so much that I thought, I need to share this. Like, I'm sitting kind of in just this beautiful position. How can I teach what it is that I've learned? So I began writing the stories of these 29 people. And in that process, a lot evolved. And I ended up taking that mapping experience that I shared with you and creating a process that I'm now able to teach others. And for the past 9 years have been really coaching people about the choices they make. And, whether that's personal choices, professional choices, relationship choices, all of it. And, my key thing is like only wanting to speak to people about the intentional choices, the ones that really matter, not what they're eating and wearing, but, the choices that really have meaning in their life.
That's interesting because you had one of the first questions I was looking at the questions you like to answer is what does it mean to have to live a life in the an examined life, and why is that important? And I think I'm a software developer and I'm a musician, I'm a podcaster. In my software development hat, we do a thing called lessons learned. Like every time we do an implementing, we go back and we look at what could we have done better,
Yeah.
because what we do is an iterative process in software design. We know we don't get everything right. We know we continually have to make updates. Like when you see your phone, you're getting all these updates. Why is that? Because the software is never done, because we can't anticipate everything. So we have to go back and have these sessions, say, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we miss? And it's kind of interesting compared to where I started a long time ago in the mainframe world. We didn't think like that. It was like, oh, we tried to get as perfect as we could, and then we're like, oh, we didn't get it. And then we got to this new kind of life cycle of continually improving. It sounds somewhat like you have to do that with your life, not just what you do with your work.
Well, your point, I mean, you've made such an interesting analogy. I mean, it's actually quite similar. If you think about how many people look back at a choice and they're feeling regret and bad about a choice that they made, just like you're describing, like an error, either of something you made, something you didn't think of. And I happen to have a little bit of a different philosophy, which is, okay, we've all made choices that were imperfect, but what if there's learning from them so that there can be more thoughtfulness as you make your next choice? So that's really the key. So in the premise of no wrong choice, no wrong software, like if there's really an opportunity to learn from the mistakes, so you do something improved going forward, it's all good. That's what I really, really believe in.
Yeah, it was like I was watching a famous musician named Victor Wooten. He's a famous bass player, and he was showing in a class that there are no wrong notes. It's how you play the notes. It's your intention. And he showed going through multiple scales using different rhythms and say, I'm hitting all these different notes. You could say they're wrong, but somehow I'm not making them wrong. It's like, how is that? Because it's your intention behind it.
Yeah.
It's actually the actual music. It's the actual rhythm or the actual, you know, the piece of the melody that he
Right.
was able to show that he was basically trying to show people there are no wrong notes in kind of like a jazz or funk kind of mindset. That's what there is. But then sometimes in like really detailed pop stars or musicians, they want to get everything perfect. And
Yeah.
there's this whole thing about happy accidents in music where something unintentional becomes something like, oh, that's what I should work on. And you didn't really plan it out. You kind of just stream of consciousness is like, oh, this actually is better than what I planned out.
And
And
that
so,
speaks to so many artists, the happy accident, the thing that you tried and experimented with, and next thing you know,
yeah.
it's kind of magical.
Yeah, it happens with like art. It's a lot of times that the intentional thing is not what works. I
Right.
mean, you have a lot of talent. You trust yourself, and then you start to realize that these unintentional things actually sometimes work better. And so I wonder, like, if this type of when you're an artist, what choice mapping means to like an art type of mindset.
That's such a beautiful question, actually, because when I began doing the choice mapping, I was using a mind mapping software online on my computer. But I realized, like, the premise of what I'm teaching people is how to think through a choice. And I happen to have one visual way to do it. But you could absolutely paint it, draw it. There's no particular way you have to do it. It can be an artistic endeavor for you, and you can bring your creativity. As I'm teaching the process that I teach, it's like, take my concepts and make them your own. Find your art in how you do this. But the one thing I'm really suggesting is go there and really look at your choices. Like, do the exploration, however you choose to document it visually. Let that be up to you artistically. Like, it can be anything. You could do it in a Word document. You could do it on a mind mapping software. You could paint it. You could use sticky notes, whatever you want to do. But let that part be your own and your own creativity.
A lot of times people have like goals or beliefs and then actions, and sometimes they don't realize, like, they think their beliefs are like, actually like truths, right? And they might not be. They might be like they were taught that that was like a truth, but it's really like
Yes.
a belief versus something that is actual, like a fact, like a real fact. So when you're making choices in terms of like what part does like the belief and the truth and those type of concepts fall into, like a philosophical
Yeah.
type of perspective?
What you're asking, which is interesting, is that, and I discovered this as I was speaking to all of these people about their choices, what kept happening and what I kept noticing were the stories that people had created about themselves because of choices that they'd made. So they might, imagine if they'd done something that they felt ashamed of. So now they've created a story that they're bad in some way or not good enough in some way or whatever it could be. And that story now, they carry it with them into
Hmm.
present time, whether or not that is truth. Not to say that what happened at that moment in that choice didn't actually happen, but now all of a sudden they've made it into something much bigger. And that old piece, that old story is now dragged around like baggage into where they are in the present. And if they don't acknowledge it, if you don't look at it and say, wait, you know what, I might have done something, maybe I screwed up when I was 20 or 30, and am I still that person? No, I've grown from it. But if I still sit with the baggage of that story of the screw up from a time or a
Hmm.
label that I was given or something, how do you move beyond it? And if you don't move beyond it, it really affects the way you make your choices in present time, because you're sitting with that negative energy from that old story. And it may be an opportunity to delve into the story. Where did it come from? Is it truth? Where can you heal from it? I mean, it's really an opportunity for some personal growth.
That's what I find is like, well, being an artist and also being in design, I kind of use both sides of the brain because I'm an electronic musician. So some of it is like technical and
Yeah.
some of it's art. Right. So, and then what we find is like there's a lot of people who are fearful, right? Like, I've talked to artists and they've got tons and tons of material that they won't show people because they don't think it's good enough. They don't think it's the right thing. And I've talked to all types of artists that kind of do this to themselves where they're trying to get perfection and they don't realize that they're not the best judge of their own work. That a lot of
Yes.
times they have to have other people look at it and say, you know what, this thing that you're so scared of is like the best thing you ever did. But you're so scared to show it to anybody. And usually you get to the next level when you start to be more open
And
and
vulnerable.
vulnerable. Because like, part of the whole thing is like when you're a really great artist, is like, wow, how can they show the world all this stuff? Because it's hard. Because you do take it personal. And if you show somebody something very vulnerable part of you, it's all in the whole world and everybody sees it and they automatically assume that's you. Now, whether
Yeah.
or not you're creating characters or not, people still think it's you. And so it's hard to present that way. And I think that applies in a lot of things. I've met people who are scared to go to the next level in business because they don't know what that means. They'll go from being an analyst to a manager or a manager to a director or into the C-suite because I was like, I don't know, am I good enough? Am I not good enough? It's like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
still they're holding on to that usually from childhood, some parent or somebody telling them they weren't good enough.
Yeah.
And, so how do you make those choices? You keep on making the same choice and you think you're gonna get a different result.
Well, exactly. And it's like, until I mean, the truth is, and we all know this to be true, whether we do it or not, like until you heal issues of your past, how you did things, etc., it's going to affect you in the present time. So, a lot of what I teach, what I've observed, speaking to so many people, and again, that first year was 29, and now it's gone on to be more than hundreds of people, all ages, of their choices. And I see this. I mean, I've developed some beautiful friendships with people in their 70s and 80s now, and I'll have these very interesting conversations with them where they, even at this age, are sitting with the shame of things that they did back in the day, whatever it may have been, and it's still affecting them. And it's like, okay, do the work to get underneath that so that you can be who you want to be and do what you want to do right now.
Yeah, I've met people, like a lot of their elders in my family, and they'll go on about, they could be 70, 80 years old, and they're still going on about stuff that happened when they were 25 or
Yeah.
22 or 18.
Yeah.
And like you see, because a lot of times with them, it's like they didn't know, they didn't have analysts to go to, they didn't have people to talk to, other than maybe their spiritual advisors at the time. And even then, they were scared to actually tell them the truth. And so there's a lot that was like held very closely. And I have a daughter who's 23, and her generation is like where they talk about everything. And I'm like, wow, you guys, she's so open compared to a lot of other people. Everybody in my family who's got kids, they're at like 23, 20, 22. They seem to have a different perspective,
Yeah.
at least in my family, the
It's so
compared to the older
interesting
generation. Yeah.
that you're bringing that up. I too, my children right now are 20, 23, and 24. So I'm really living in that space of, I call them the emerging adults. It's like they're, think about them. They are kind of new to making choices, maybe without parental support. They don't have necessarily the confidence that they will in years to come. They're a little nervous. They're scared they're going to make a mistake. Yet they also really want to do it on their own, and they want to figure it out. And like, it's so interesting. I think, God, how different would I have been in my 20s if I had really had that confidence in my choice making? And I was pretty confident, but just, I think back to what I want to give my kids, our kids, all of these kids in their 20s and 30s, this ability to have a thoughtfulness about how they make their choices and what they're doing, because they're dealing with their first professional choices, their personal choices, their relationship choices. It's all together. I mean, it's just kind of fascinating what that demographic is really up against at the moment.
I think a lot of it is like what you say, and having their life examined, is doing that lessons learned, going back and looking at what you do. It's kind of like I'm into poetry a lot. I'm into the Victorians, and they have this idea of the looking glass. Right.
Yeah.
So you Tennyson and Wordsworth and Hawthorne, all that. They were always talking about this looking glass, and they're kind of looking at themselves, and they're kind of getting this idea of like what's inside, right? And actually challenging themselves to write about it and say, who is that other person? That other person is just an aspect of yourself. Are you
Yeah.
willing to dive into it,
Yeah.
right? And to actually question, to ask the question, kind of like the holistic thinking of that kind of period of people who are really intellectually challenging things. It's like why is it this way? What, how, where, when? Like, why am I doing this? Where is this coming from? And a lot, sometimes you're in a culture, or you're in kind of training that you're told not to. You're told not to really question things, but to just do it because somebody told you that that's the way. And then you never really analyze, like, why are you doing
Right.
things?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so, I guess when I think about, our kids, for example, I hope to heighten their awareness so they have that sensitivity as they are making their choices, as they're, even making mistakes. Like I think about, I mean, if you look back on your life, probably the best learning you ever got were from the things you did wrong, most likely.
Oh
That didn't
yeah.
feel good in the
Yeah.
moment, but that is the truth. Now, if you look at your daughter, for example, of course you don't want her to be in pain. You don't want her to make mistakes, but she needs to make mistakes. Like she needs to make her choices her way and figure it out so that she has that information to go forward and make her next choices. I had a gorgeous experience happen when it was like 23, 24. It was one of my earlier jobs. And a boss at the time asked me to make a choice that just felt bigger than what I knew how to do. And I said, I don't know how to do that. I'm 23. And he's like, you're right. You don't have 10 years more of experience. He's like, but you've got to make that choice with where you are today. And then you will learn from it. And then you will bring that to tomorrow's choice. And it was amazing advice, and now as a parent, as I look at my kids and I get to speak with their friends, it's like, make the best choice with who you are at the moment, with what you have, and learn from it. My kids will sometimes say, can you make that choice for me? No, I can't make that choice for you. You have to do it. You have to make it, and you have to think through like what's good, the pros and cons, as we all do, and then see what the after effects are. And then you use that as you go forward.
Yeah, because in my family, I made a big choice in terms of I ended up being an expat and worked in Japan for 2 years with my whole family, brought them there. And a lot of people in my family were totally against it because my daughter was like 3 years old, getting ready to go to preschool and kindergarten. The grandparents didn't want that. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, how you're gonna be gone," and I made the decision because I thought, I was a cancer survivor, and the pre-cancerous version of me, I wouldn't have done that. But because I survived, I said, you know what?
So
I'm not
interesting.
gonna have regrets in
Yeah.
life. I'm gonna go do things I think are cool, whether or not my family's into it, whether or
Yeah.
not people are into it. I think that this would be very helpful because I was looking to try to get my daughter in a private school. I was looking for my daughter to go to not traditional public school. And then I got this opportunity to go to Japan, and she went to this international school. It's called Nishimachi. And I was like, wow. It's like, I just, I was able to hit that goal. And even coming back now, my daughter, age 22, age 23, she still has all the Japanese stuff that she learned as part of her. She's an artist and she has a Japanese motif to her work. So the decision I made when she was like 3 years old still affects her
Totally
today.
affected
I can
her.
see. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see, and she's an art director, and people are always talking about how she has this kind of Japanese sensibility, but she's American. How'd she get that? And I'm like, because we went there, because we lived there.
So, what's so interesting listening to your story? It's like what you did back in that day, like you made an unpopular choice. Like you did, like you had your family, probably not that supportive, not that happy with you. And you had to dig in deeply to say, this is what I need to do. Like, I'm a cancer survivor. I am taking risks. I am not being held back by things. This is what's important to me. I'm sorry you don't all agree with me, but I believe this is right for me, for my family, for my daughter. I'm doing it. That's not easy to do. Like, that's a huge thing to do yet. And what's kind of amazing, just think about it from a parenting perspective, like to be able to, like, your daughter's obviously benefited from having had that experience, but also to share with her, I hope you do that sometime. I hope you make an unpopular choice. I hope you do what you know you need to do that may go against the grain of what others want for you. But if you really think it's the right thing, I hope you do it. Sort of that's
Hmm.
such an important message. And you modeled it for her by having done it so fiercely.
Yeah, yeah, she continued to have that kind of perspective just because she had this international perspective that most kids don't get.
Yeah.
She's been in the Japanese school system, been in the American system, been in an international environment that had, multiple cultures living in
Yeah.
Tokyo. We met people from all over the world. And
Wow.
and it's just that was the thing I wanted because, I went to school, I went to Bowdoin and I was a part of the international club and I met a lot of people. My roommate was Japanese, and that's part of one of the reasons I had an affinity for Japan for even going back to when I was in undergraduate school. My classmate was a Japanese guy. He taught me a lot of cool stuff, and I'm like, wow. And he kept on telling me Japan, I should go to Japan. And I said, yeah, Marco, he was a Brazilian Japanese guy. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's true. And I started to have this affinity for hanging around a lot of international people just because I didn't grow up with people like that. And I wanted to
Yeah.
know more about the world. And I think that type of thing is sometimes you get a situation where people don't want that. They want what is familiar, what's comfortable, and then they don't challenge themselves. And I find that it is hard to get out of your comfort zone. Sometimes the choices people make will put them in the box. What I kind of call the box is like they get stuck in a
Yeah.
box and then they want to get out. And then at some point it gets so confining that they make a choice to kind of break out of it
Well, and
because they're
that's
getting
it.
like
Like,
diminishing returns.
they might have been that person, as you're saying, who's been in a box for a bit, like they don't step out of what's safe. That's what they do. And then some point later in life, they say, wait, I want to break out. Like, I want to do that crazy thing. I want to do that unexpected, unpopular thing that people are questioning, and it just feels right. And it can be hard when you do it later in life because you don't have people might have already
Tools.
pigeonholed you in a particular way, and it's kind of like, wait, you're doing that thing, you're taking the leap, doing that crazy thing. And that in itself is such a big and courageous choice to kind of buck the system and go away from the stuff you've done to something you want, especially if you've been that person who's typically been in a box.
Yeah, I think what I find is like, there are obstacles to try to make intentional choices. And a lot of them was a sociology major. So I think a lot of people, have this concept of like anomy. People don't want to be outside in that outside group. They want to be accepted. So they'll be willing to conform to societal things at a microcosm level and a macrocosm level. And so then they don't get out of the box because they don't want to be that person who's challenging things because that person probably is not going to be the most popular person in the room. Or they're not going to be the person that everybody was like, oh, they're causing trouble. They're doing something that's different. And so when you do that different thing, it is a lot of pressure to actually be in that position. And it is a
Yeah,
lot of uncertainty. And I think a lot of people don't like the uncertainty. They don't like the pressure. They
that's
don't like
100%.
being, yeah. So how do you get people to look at their choices and then make decisions that might put them in a popular uh, position?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Think about it. Like, any choice you make today about something you either want today or want in the future, there's always an element of uncertainty. Like, you don't know the results of what are going to come from that choice. And if you have a personality where like that scares you, it may be harder to kind of step into that because you're nervous of the uncertainty. And I hear that all the time. There's so many people who are just nervous to step into a choice because they don't know what's going to happen for them. Um, and you can't change somebody's disposition. Like, it's for them to change it. But I do think, you know, there was a beautiful quote. I believe it's a Tony Robbins quote, and it's something like, the quality of our life is directly proportional to the amount of uncertainty we can tolerate. Which is a really interesting thing to consider. It's like, how much uncertainty can you hold as you step into making a new choice? Many people can't, and I'm sure we all know many of them. And I'm sure there have been times when you couldn't. And then there are times when you're just like, I'm going for it. I'm going to do that thing. I don't know what's on the other side, but I have enough confidence in myself. I know I'm resilient. I know I can figure it out. Like, it's having that so that you can trust yourself. And a lot of it is having a bit of trust and faith as you
Mhm.
step into something unknown. I mean, imagine you landing in Japan with a little girl. There's a lot, and a certain element of trust that you have to have, and faith, and how you're showing up with people to create a life that's both safe, exciting, interesting, all the things that you probably wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it was a challenge because I had never really gone overseas and, had to learn language, culture, everything all at once. And
Yeah.
it was totally different, but to me, it was exciting. And because I had kind of gone through the cancer, I started to build tools. I started to kind of get this tool set where I started getting confidence that I didn't have. And I think it's also this kind of self awareness, like you talk about self compassion or self forgiveness. Is like at certain points I had gotten to a point where I felt like I hadn't gotten where I needed to go. I was 27 years old and I hadn't really gotten to where I needed to be.
Yeah.
And in part of those decisions, I ended up, getting married, having a child, going to Japan. It was like this thing that happened where I didn't have the self confidence to make those decisions. And then after the cancer, I started saying, like, why not? Why should I stop myself from doing the things I want or going after the things I want to do just because I don't know what's going to happen? I didn't know what was going to happen with the cancer. So I think what happened is, it's a crucible kind of moment. It's like some people hit that crucible
Yeah.
and then that gives them the permission to themselves to like, okay, I can do this. And I don't know if everybody has to have that such a bad thing happen, but I looked at the cancer was like probably one of the best things that ever happened to me because I wouldn't even be here on the mic. The other version of myself, I wouldn't have done that. I was super shy. I couldn't even do anything public at all.
You know, which
It's a
just in
major
itself,
transformation that just got to the point where I want to do these things. Yeah.
yeah. You know, but it's funny, like listening to your story, you're again a really compelling example of, you had something that was really scary that happened to you. You made a choice to push through it. You were scared, but it's like you also, as you said, you had this key moment of like, I've got to move forward in this way. You knew that for yourself, and not everybody has that. I mean, not every choice is a pivotal choice that we hold on to. Some
Yeah,
are
yeah,
smaller
crucible,
in
yeah.
scale, but I'm sure we can all look back on our lives at the 5 or 10 key choices that we made that really did make a difference in and where we brought intentionality and thoughtfulness into how we made that choice, and that choice has now affected who we are today and how we show up today.
So when you do this, after you did this whole study of looking at all these people and looking at the choices they made, is part of the process of like that self-examination, like, like in a project level, we do the lessons learned. So
Yeah.
when you're looking at their choices, like what's the time frame? And is it really like based
That's
on the
personal.
individual?
That's a
Yeah.
totally personal choice. So, excuse me. I teach people about 3 different mapping processes, and the key one that I teach is called an exploration map, and that is an opportunity for someone to explore either a choice they did make or a choice they want to make. And as far as the choice they did make, I've looked back with people like a choice they made 50 years prior. I was doing this with a woman in her 60s, and it was a conversation of a choice she'd made in high school. So as an example, versus I've looked back with something somebody did a year ago. So it's really all personal choice. And of course, my own self,
Mhm.
because I've been on this journey, I have looked back across my whole life. I mean, I went back and probably looked at the first choices
Mhm.
that I really remember making intentionally, which began in college. And then subsequently into my 30s and 40s, it was like, what choices was I making? And also what's so interesting as you choose to go back, and it is a self-exploration process. It's certainly a reflective, exploratory process. And you can go as deep as you want. I mean, that's kind of the magic of it. How many questions and answers do you want to go with yourself to understand who were you at that time, and what is there to understand about yourself from that time? Like, I almost, in a very simplistic way, if you think about looking back at a choice, you're either looking back at a choice you feel really good that you made, or one that you may not feel good that you made. And so for the ones that you feel good about, it's really an opportunity to say, okay, what did I love about myself when I was 20, 30, et cetera, based on that choice that I see within me now? Like I can see that a piece of me was growing back then at that early age, and I see it within me. That certainly is a beautiful experience to have. And then similarly, the looking back and addressing, like, where did I make some choices I'm not so proud of? Where did I hurt somebody? Where did I not do something well? Where do I, had I had a mentor, had I had guidance, maybe I would have done it differently, but I didn't. So how do I forgive myself now for what I did then? And again, importantly, how do I learn from it so I do it differently in the future? And I think for anybody listening who's a parent, to imagine sharing this with their kids, to give them that support of, how they look back at what they've done.
It's interesting. I was looking at the point that you talk about self-compassion and self-forgiveness. A lot of people look at a mistake and they want to go, apologize or ask for forgiveness to the person they felt that they hurt. But when you think about self-compassion and self-forgiveness, I've talked to a lot of people who are therapists, and they always kind of talk about, like, you got to start with yourself before you can go anywhere else. So
But
is
your
that kind of
point
where
is,
that comes from?
well, your point is interesting. I think it's both. I mean, like, let's imagine you're looking back and there's something that you did and you did it to somebody. Maybe you did something that hurt somebody. Number one, you need to kind of get it together with yourself. Like, what did you do? What was going on? Like, really own your truth about it. And if appropriate, absolutely go and apologize to the other person. I mean, there's no time limit on when you can
Hmm.
apologize to somebody. I think it's always, I think if there's sincerity in the apology, I think it's always well regarded and appreciated. And I mean, just imagine how you would feel if some, bully from elementary school, got it together now as a grown adult and said, I really want to talk to you. I was an idiot back then. I did all these stupid things and I've learned from it. And I'm so sorry that you were the recipient of my rage and the dumb things that I did. Like, you might be traumatized by the kid having been bullied, but you might be able to hear it. It might be a
Yeah,
really interesting
I
experience
do
if that could
appreciate.
happen.
Yeah, because I had a best friend that I grew up in the '70s with all that busting and stuff, and they had a best friend, this Irish kid, and he apologized to me. I'm still friends with him to this day. We were like 10 years old, and he apologized for, like, not standing up for me when some of the kids were, like, bullying me. And he's like, we're in the 50s, and he apologized to me for that. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow. And I didn't ask him or anything. He just came out of nowhere
Yeah.
and said, remember when we used to hang out at the bus stop? And he's like, you know what? I really feel bad about that. I want to say I was sorry for not standing by you. And I was like, wow,
And here's the other thing,
that was
not
pretty big.
only to the bully, think about it. I mean, who as a parent has not made a choice or done something that they're not proud of? We all have. We've done something to our kids, said something to our kids, hurt our kids in some way. Imagine being able to go back to your kid. So you've got a daughter at 23, like, maybe there's something that happened, a conversation, a way you didn't behave, something yucky that happened. You can apologize now. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Not that it makes it all go away, but there's a humanity to that, like, as we
Yeah.
grow, not only do we do the work for ourselves, but we can go back and have the conversations if we want. That, and therein
Yeah.
lies another
Because,
choice. Like, are you going to be the
yeah.
person today who chooses to have conversations with people in your past that you want to handle?
He kind of learned, like, if for my family, that the elders had a habit, or like, you just respect them because of their age,
Yeah.
regardless of whatever they did. Right. And now today, I mean, like, my daughter's generation is like, wow, that's not the case for me. Cause, like,
No.
if X person in our family, I don't care if they're 80, 90, if they were doing this, I'm not going to just give them respect just because they're
Yeah.
90. I'm not going to do that.
Well,
And
they are a
that's
different
that's kind of like
generation.
yeah, it's a sea change, compared to, like, we were just told that you have to. And
Yeah.
my daughter, and, like, it's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's like, that's a totally different point of view. But yeah, so I think, like, you start to see, how you could actually learn from that, because then it's like, wow, yeah, I can look at the things I did and not be embarrassed or not think because, oh, I'm the dad, I don't have to apologize. Or, I'm the parent, I'm always right or something. Like, no, you have to look at, and it's not just a position that you're the father, you're the mother, you're the grandma, you're a human being. Everybody makes mistakes,
And I think
so
there's more learning.
is it kind of hard?
I think
Yeah.
as parents, I think we can teach our children so much more by being the role model of showing them that we can admit our frailties, our mistakes, our bad choices, and speak that to them. Whether they take it in, they may not be able to process it at this age, and it might take them years, who knows? But
Mm.
I think that is very valuable parenting and modeling
Yeah,
for
that's
the
totally
next
valuable.
generation. Yeah.
Yeah, because they look at patterns and behavior, as a sociology major, you think about like how people get stuck in patterns. They get stuck in behaviors. They get stuck in like codependency. They get stuck in all addictive, all kinds of things that happen because of choices. And sometimes not their choices people made. And if you're a
Yeah.
you're a child and people are making choices for you, you get stuck into patterns because they were
Right.
kind of grown on you. You were kind of trained in that, or that's what you believe because that's what you've always experienced. And it's hard to
Yeah.
kind of break those patterns because it was like learned behavior or kind of like expected behavior, and everybody's
Yeah.
trying to satisfy those needs, and then you have to decide, are you going to do what you want to do? And some people feel guilty about doing what they want to do, or trying to experience what the real version of themselves. Like they start to come to the point where, oh, I really want to be a musician, but at 9 to 5, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Or I wanted to be an author, but 9 to 5, I'm doing this. And then they come to the realization, like I'm not happy, and I'm going to make that move. And I've talked to so many writers or artists or people that made that decision, and they made it at different points in their lives.
Hmm.
And then they suddenly say, wow, I'm a lot happier.
I mean, but that
Because they
choice
finally
takes
broke
courage.
out
I
of that.
mean, you're exactly right. Think of the person who like works with a company, their salary's okay, like everything's okay, but they're not waking up feeling great in the morning. And they want to make the leap, and they want to make that choice to do something more interesting, whatever it may be. Like that's a big choice to do that. And there are risks involved, and just bringing thought and true awareness to what is involved in making a choice like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good that comes out of analyzing what you do, and like you said, if it's everybody's personal choice, some people, they can get to the point where they're kind of like, they're looking at like every project they do, or every kind of couple weeks or something. They're keeping a diary, and they're looking at, they're doing a lot of self-examination. I've talked to people that go into therapy, and they've been told they should journal and then review their journals or diary. And so is that part of this whole part of the steps when you go to start to figure out how to have an examined life or to good
You
choice
know,
mapping? Is doing a diary or a journal part of it?
well, I teach a process called choice mapping. So in my book called The Book of Choice, I would say two key messages that I share. One is, you're bringing up this idea of the examined life. What an examined life means to me is one in which you're being thoughtful versus, like, think about the opposite. Like, if you were not paying attention to your choices, life would just happen to you. Versus, like, the flip side is like, okay, what does it mean to bring a thoughtfulness and awareness and intentionality to the choices I make so that I have greater agency over what it is that's happening for me. So that's number one. And then secondarily, I teach this mapping process that I really, you know, essentially first made up and then crafted and realized I had a process there to teach. And what I'm really teaching people is how, again, how to look back or look forward to choices they did or want to make, and how, like, differently than a journal. Like, I find when we journal about things, and I've journaled for much of my life, I tend to scribble a lot, get a lot of stuff on a page, and I rarely go back to it. Versus in a map, it's usually on one piece of paper, and in one at a glance view, you can really see a lot of information that you've gathered about your choice. And you're writing kind of in smaller nuggets of language so that like each word kind of means something to you. So when you
Is it
read it,
more visual? Is
it's,
it more like a
it's,
flow chart?
yes, it's a flow chart. And it's also a way to quite simply to capture your truth. So you ask the question of like, are you going back to it? And I go back to some of my old maps often, especially if it's a choice. Like, let's just imagine you've made a choice to do something professionally, like you're going to choose to work with a new business partner, for example, and you think through like, why does that matter? What am I scared of? What am I excited about? What are actions will I take? And you give thought to that. And then 6 months later, you're not that happy with the business partner. And you think, God, did I make a bad choice? And if you've done a map, if you've thought it through, you can go back and look at like, where was my head 6 months ago? What was I thinking? And what versus where am I today? And you can assess like, do I need to course correct in this choice? Or is the partner just not right? But these are the key things that I want. Maybe it's about finding a new partner. It gives you an opportunity to ground into where you were at a moment in time when you made the choice, to assess, is what I said then still valid for who I am now? It may not be. And if it's not, then you make a new choice. Or you might just need to sometimes ground back into, oh, yes, I'm reminded that is why I did this. It is important for these reasons. They still ring true to me today. And that's really helpful.
That's interesting because like when I was in Japan, one of the things I did that worked was instead of doing waterfall documents that were these big 100-page documents, I did these activity diagrams using UML. And what I was able to point out was logic is logic, whether you're Japanese or English. If you it's more like a flow chart. The Japanese and the English people in the room could understand the logic of the flow chart.
Yeah.
Right? They could understand the logic of the inputs and outputs and the actors could be people, the actors could be systems. And so we were using this UML notation to show things at a very high level in a context of what's going in and what's going out, what's going here to this person, going there back to that person. This flow in the information in terms of diagramming. And it was a lot easier to get approval for where we were going instead of trying to decipher is the Japanese translation of this document the same as the English translation. And so we were able to get on the same page. And I continued to use that kind of thing that I did in Japan. And I found it even in the C-suite when I explained things to executives, if it were more visual, it works better than doing this big, long, conversation about these big documents. So I found visual tools do get to the point, and you tend to go back and you can use them because they're more readable, more understandable, more universal.
Yeah, and I know I have enjoyed the visual of it, and I'm enjoying teaching the visual to others so that they can, either experiment with my way or use my way as a jumping off point and go kind of creatively figure out their own way. But just the concept of looking at what you're doing with the choice on one piece of paper is quite impactful.
Yeah, just having all that context in a more high, it's like kind of like the elevator pitch. The idea of the elevator pitch is that you can describe what you want in that elevator. By the time you walk out, the person knows what it is, right? You then go on and on and on and on, right? And I think that's where you can get to the point and actually, it's retainable because it's like digestible. It's like, so that's kind of like the way things are today with TikTok and Reels. Is like, why do people like the 90-second thing, the 30-second thing?
Yeah. Well, and interestingly,
that's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, a half hour.
The choice questions that we were talking about, the guide that I created, it really, in a very simple way, is teaching you like 5 key questions to think about for every choice. Like at some point it becomes quite automatic. Like as you get comfortable with it, I just use my fingers to think through the 5 questions, and it's like just doing that and being thoughtful and documenting it however you can. And the first question, and the most important question for any choice, is, why does it matter? Like, why do you even care about this choice? Like, if you can't answer that, why bother? Really, that it's got to start
Yeah, it's like
there.
you always ask people, like, you ask people, they say what they want to be rich, they want to have $1 million. Like, what are you going to do with the $1 million?
Why? Yeah.
Like, is it really the $1 million, or is it that
Or
you
is it
want to
what you
do
want to do with
X?
it?
Yeah, and so maybe
Yeah.
you should be focused on what you were going to do with it rather than the million. It's like, what is it that
Right.
you want to do? Maybe you don't need $1 million to do what
Yeah.
you want to do. Right? You could actually do what you want to do and get there faster if you actually realize what it is you're trying to get to.
So true. So true. Yeah.
So that sounds like I always like top 5 and top 10 list. Like in my business, I try to cut through all the static. And when I get to somebody and I want to know what the requirement is, it's like, what are the top 5 things you want to do?
Yeah.
And if it's like overly a little bit, it's like, well, top 10 things you want to do. And you get it, you break it down, and then you prioritize it. Say, well, what can you live without? And what do you need right now?
Yeah.
And it's like once you start to create prioritization of where you want to be, I think that's where you can actually make it so that you actually can succeed. Now, failing, like I said, being a musician, we don't succeed all the time. A lot of times it's the process of writing a song is a lot of, like, you could say they're failures, but I look at it as like they're stepping stones each take. Like you say, you do 50 takes. Each of those takes is getting you toward that final thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that on the 23rd take that you failed. You're just trying to get closer to where you want it to be.
And it's interesting just taking what your example and applying that to choice. One could say, like, I choose to, have the perfect song, whatever, or write the perfect song, or I choose to explore the process of writing a song. And knowing that process is many, many, many iterations, and actually enjoying the process, knowing, there will be twists and turns on that journey. And that's just part of it. If the only journey, if you go in thinking, and again, this goes back to the art conversation in the beginning, like, I have to create a perfect piece right out of the gate, like, probably pretty unlikely, versus like, I'm choosing to enjoy the process of what I'm creating right now. And that's very different. And that
And part of
opens you
what
up.
we, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, part of
it
what you
opens
find
you up
out
to
as,
enjoy it.
part of what you find out as a producer is like you go and do those 23 takes, and then you find out that the 5th take is actually the one. Right. And then you show the people, like, what you did here is closer to your original intent. It actually sounds more truthful because as you've gone on, you've gotten further away from where you started. So a lot of times
Yeah,
with artists is they'll keep on changing it and trying to make it perfect. And then they actually, what happens is they get scared of what
dilute
they
it.
originally did and they dilute it. And then sometimes
Yeah,
it's the job of
yeah,
the producer to say, what you said on the 5th take is so honest and so perfect. Everything you've done since then is actually detract from it. And so you
yeah.
open up their mind. It's like, you don't have to take the last one. Sometimes it's the first one or the earlier ones are actually better. And when
Interesting.
you get to that, you open yourself up to say, even if it has errors, even if it has mistakes, that one sounds better than all the other ones.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure as we come to the end, I know we've had such a fun time talking, and I know you wanted to really address the whole concept of how a choice can change your life. And the truth is, every day we all have the ability to wake up and make a new choice that can have great meaning for us, whatever that is. And no matter like what the past was, what yesterday was, how you behaved before, how you showed up in a circumstance, whatever issues you may feel from past, any day we have the ability to choose something that moves us into the future as we want it to do.
Yeah, I believe that what you're giving people is another tool set, which I think a lot of people, they don't know how to start. A lot of times, reason people go to a life coach, they go to a mentor, they go to a choice coach, is because they have a hard time making that first step, or they want to do something, but they don't know how.
Yeah.
And I think what's really cool, what I've been doing with the podcast, is talking to all these different people with different strategies. And you have an interesting strategy, which I have never really seen before, which I think people will find very. I think is a good first step is to check out. Go to choicequestions.com, go to your primary site,
And from my primary
kimdeyoung.com.
site, yeah, they can get access to my book. And, that teaches all of these pieces there. So that's certainly the first thing.
Yeah, and all these will be clickable. Right now, you can't click on it, but when we publish on all the platforms that we're on, you actually can click through on that link, and that'll
Yeah.
make it easier for the audience to go wherever, at least on the video versions. You'll be able to click through on that. So I do appreciate the time you took with us today. I think it's
Oh,
an
it's been a
interesting
pleasure.
perspective. I've never, talked to a choice coach before. So thank you
Thank you.
for being on the program. And,
Yeah, my pleasure.
I think it's a great conversation. Good, people go back and look at it, listen to it, watch it, and hopefully they'll check out everything you have to offer. So thank you again for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation. It was wonderful.
Have a good night.
You too. Take care.